Welcome back to another Explainer. Today, we're tearing down an absolute culinary icon. And look, we're not just talking about a simple snack here. Oh no. We're looking at what is essentially a heavily engineered, precision-built payload. Welcome to the architecture of the Chicago hot dog.
Okay, let's dive into this. You've probably heard the phrase, getting a hot dog dragged through the garden. Well, in reality, that colloquialism is describing the assembly of a highly specific matrix. We're talking exactly 7 contrasting toppings on an all-beef frankfurter. It's this careful, incredibly deliberate structural balance. You've got the heavy sodium and lipid payloads of the meat, and they are counteracted perfectly against these really sharp, acidic, and crisp vegetative layers.
So, to truly understand this construction, we need a blueprint. Here's our agenda for today's Explainer. First up, the working class origins. Second, Protocol Alpha, the base. Third, Protocol Beta, the architecture. Fourth, the ketchup prohibition. And finally, number 5, the Char Dog Rebellion. All right, let's get right into our first module.
Section 1. The Working Class Origins, Engineering a Survival Meal.
And this brilliantly illustrates why this precise architecture was engineered in the first place. We have to rewind to the Great Depression. Vendors operating around Chicago's Maxwell Street Market, well, they had to sell a meal that could genuinely keep a person going during some of the toughest economic times in American history. And they sold it for just a nickel, 5 cents. This gave you a highly caloric, completely self-contained, vegetable-heavy meal. It really wasn't just a casual lunch. It was literally a working-class survival tool disguised as street food. It's honestly just a perfect example of how economic necessity breeds total culinary ingenuity.
Moving on to Section 2, Protocol Alpha, the base, the meat and carbohydrate. If we want to accurately reconstruct this historic payload today, there is absolutely zero room for substitution. The meat itself has incredibly rigid parameters. You must use an all-beef frankfurter, and specifically, it has to be the universally accepted Vienna beef standard. But here's the crucial part. It must feature a natural casing. Why? Because that natural casing provides a mandatory sensory experience. You need that highly specific mechanical snap when you bite into it. If you don't have that snap, the structural integrity of the entire bite is completely compromised.
Now, let's compare how we actually prepare the meat and the carbohydrate. For the hydration phase, the sausage isn't baked, and it definitely isn't deep fried. No, it's got to be simmered in water or steamed at roughly 170 to 180 degrees Fahrenheit. Then, on the other side of our equation, we have the carbohydrate. This is a high-gluten hot dog bun that is completely encrusted in poppy seeds. Notice that the bun also has to be steamed. This steaming process is absolutely critical because it creates a soft, warm, pliable matrix. It's engineered perfectly to yield to the incredibly heavy payload of toppings we're about to add, without just fracturing or tearing apart in your hands.
Let's move to Section 3 and see how this builds. Protocol Beta, the architecture, where sequence is critical.
You can't just throw these ingredients together randomly. There's a sequence. Here is the exact architectural blueprint. Step 1 requires our wet adhesives. So that's a zigzag of classic bright yellow mustard followed by sweet pickle relish, applied direct to the meat. Step 2 layers on the aromatics with a heavy dusting of finely diced raw white onion. Then Step 3 introduces the aqueous shields. Now this is where it gets very structural. 2 semicircle tomato wedges are tucked along one side, right between the meat and the bun. Then 1 long dill pickle spear is tucked along the exact opposite side. They're essentially wedging and protecting the entire inner structure. Step 4 brings the thermal heat, dropping 2 to 3 whole pickled sport peppers right on top. And finally, Step 5 is the aromatic finish, which we are going to look at a little closer in just a second.
But actually, taking a quick step back to our wet adhesives, I have to point out this highly unnatural, super vibrant, neon green sweet pickle relish. I mean, it is practically glowing. So how do they achieve this incredibly specific hue? Well, it's actually this wild local Chicago tradition of literally adding blue dye to standard sweet relish. It is wonderfully artificial, it's completely unique to this regional build, and it is absolutely mandatory for the visual aesthetic.
Okay, returning to Step 5. The aromatic finish. This is a generous final dusting of celery salt over the entire assembly. And look, this isn't just a garnish. It's the architectural keystone holding the entire flavor profile together. It acts as the ultimate umami bridge, seamlessly binding those sharp, fresh vegetables directly to the savory, lipid-rich meat.
Section 4. The Ketchup Prohibition, Protecting the Payload.
Now what's really interesting here is we are tackling the absolute non-negotiable taboo of this build. Let's compare the actual science of Chicago flavor chemistry against ketchup. The Chicago dog already features a highly delicate pH balance. It utilizes fresh tomatoes for acidic brightness and that neon relish for sweetness. Ketchup, on the other hand, is fundamentally a heavily sweetened sucrose-rich tomato paste. It's often loaded with high fructose corn syrup. So, introducing ketchup actively destroys that fragile pH balance. It aggressively masks the carefully formulated spices in the Vienna beef, and it completely overpowers the sharp, vital bite of the mustard and onions. Simply put, it is chemically incompatible with the payload.
But what's fascinating is how this chemically sound rule has evolved significantly into strict social etiquette. Requesting ketchup in Chicago is considered a severe culinary faux pas. In fact, if you're over the age of 12, asking for it might actually result in an outright refusal of service by the vendor. This rule has really morphed into a form of regional tribalism. It's a performative cultural inside joke that locals primarily use to instantly identify tourists. And look, we're simply reporting the facts here neutrally. Whether you personally agree with it or not, the prohibition is a very real sociological phenomenon at these hot dog stands.
Finally, we arrive at Section 5, the Char Dog Rebellion, the Red Team Report.
Because let's be honest, no set of rigid rules exist without a massive subfaction boldly defying them. We like to call this the devil's advocate perspective. Look at the stance from highly regarded vendors like the Wiener Circle. They argue the char dog is mechanically superior. They are directly challenging the undisputed historical method of simmering, replacing it with a radically different high-heat approach to thermal processing.
So the crucial point here is how this actually changes the physical structure of the meat. With the traditional method, we have the steamed natural casing, right? That's our historical baseline. But as a counterpoint, the char dog introduces a massive charcoal Maillard reaction. To achieve this, vendors heavily score the ends of the sausage in an X pattern and then aggressively grill it over open charcoal. This blast of high heat renders the internal lipids and creates an incredibly smoky, shatter-crisp casing. It acts as a super strong textural counterpoint to the soft steamed bun and all those wet, fresh vegetables.
Which brings us to the end of our structural analysis, and it leaves us with one final, pretty provocative thought to examine. Is the architecture of a regional dish defined by strict culinary science, or is it defined by performative cultural tribalism? As focused learners, I'm going to leave that to you to ponder. Where exactly do we draw the line between preserving perfect historical flavor chemistry and accommodating personal taste or mechanical innovation? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep questioning the architecture of everything around you.